Another story that I'm very keen to talk about, Nigel Farage. He has been criticising again Sir Keir Starmer, this time because Reform UK, and this is a campaign that you've been very instrumental in. I'll set that scene right at the start, Mark. This is about the amount of transparency we should have when it comes to the impact of immigration on this country. Tell us more.
Yeah, so what effectively is happening at the moment, which is why I'm outraged, really, on behalf of the British people and taxpayers, is you see people like Keir Starmer blaming voters for misinformation and disinformation while not making information available to them, specifically about how things like mass immigration are impacting our country, impacting crime rates, imprisonment rates, repeat offending, welfare claims, tax credits, housing, accommodation. Many other countries in Europe, Michelle, collect this data and they make it available to taxpayers so they can see for themselves how this experiment is changing their country. Our government doesn't do that. So what happens is, under both the Conservative and the Labour governments recently, if you want to know crime rates by nationality, immigration status, country of origin, if you want welfare claims, tax credits, housing, accommodation, etc., they've got this information, but they're not sharing it with people. So actually, you know, I said publicly, we need to do something about this. The 5 Reform MPs sent a letter to Keir Starmer, and I think what is especially outrageous, Michelle, especially outrageous, is he hasn't even bothered to reply to their letter saying, why is this information not being shared with the British people? I think it's outrageous.
I'll come to you in a sec, but what I also want to flag, and what I think is so bizarre, I feel like sometimes I'm just living in some kind of odd parallel universe, because you've got people like Robert Jenrick speaking out about this. You've got the MP Nick Timothy, a man that I quite like and respect, actually. Robert Jenrick saying, why can't we have a sensible... Sorry, we can't have a sensible conversation about migration if government keeps deleting the data, whether it's on welfare or crime. The institutional cover-up of the impacts of immigration is a scandal. But I just look at that and I go, but what are you talking about? Because you guys were in government for 14 years, and I don't actually remember this information being widely and freely published. Anyway, what do you think to it all?
So I think if the government is gathering data on any issue, then that should be available to the public. There's lots of pieces of information about migration I'd like to see, including a number of things to do with the benefits, including the skills that are brought here, the new businesses that are started, the positive impact on public services through staffing and so on. And I think if you wanted to have a sort of grown-up conversation about migration, which we're constantly told by figures on the right, by people like Matt, that they want to have, then you would be including those sorts of things in your campaign.
So, just to be clear, asking for transparency, asking for information, asking that British taxpayers get data that is affecting the world around them, affecting their country, that's not a grown-up request.
No, as I said, Matt, I'm all for data that the state collects to be made publicly available in whatever the right way that is, so that researchers can look at it, so that taxpayers can look at it. But, of course, this request is a political request, of course. We understand that. It's not come from you as a researcher writing a letter to the Home Secretary. It's been tweeted by a leader of a political party to the Prime Minister and followed up in the same way.
Actually, there are lots of academics who would like to have this data.
No doubt there are, and there are lots of academics who'd like to have other types of data as well. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't have it, including, as I'm saying, the various benefits that we receive through migration and through immigrants coming to our country. The point I'm trying to make is, and the reason why we're talking about it, and whether it's a scandal or not that an opposition MP's tweeted letters of the Prime Minister's been responded to or not. And, you know, I used to tweet those letters from the Leader of the Opposition to the Prime Minister. And you know what you're doing when you're doing that. You're making part of a political
representing
campaign.
the British people.
You're making a part of a political campaign in order to make a point. And now...
Asking for transparency.
Well, you're asking for transparency, and I'm certainly not supporting the government, and I'm saying transparency is good. But the transparency I'd like to see would take things fully in the round, including benefits, and then we could begin to have, you want to have so you say, a grown-up conversation about it. Let's do so. Let's do so without trying to cherry-pick, without trying to sort out, present things in the most alarming way possible. Yeah. And then we could hopefully get somewhere. I'm 37 years old. For basically all of my life I can remember, there have been people like yourself and like many others who come from the political right, who have large platforms, who have spent, I can remember it my entire life, saying we can't have a conversation about migration. Yet we seem to be having one all of the time.
Well, you're turning it into a slightly different point. What riles people today, James, and I think you accept this does happen, we now have a censorship industrial complex that basically says to people, if you question mass immigration, if you question the effects of migration on Western societies, you are misinformed, you're disinformed. We need BBC Verify to come along and say, hey, you got it wrong. But actually, what's right is you cannot say to people, you should respect the expert class, you should trust the expert class, while that class doesn't share information with British people. Because I bet you what we're going to find when this information comes out, maybe you're right and I'm wrong. Maybe we'll find, hey, immigration is reducing crime. Maybe immigration is driving the economy to new heights. Maybe it's just all hidden away and actually immigration is the best thing in the world. But actually what we're going to find, I bet, is what we see in Denmark, what we see in France, what we see in Germany, what we see in the Netherlands, which is mass immigration is a net fiscal cost. It's not a benefit. It's not actually helping us. It's not driving prosperity. And as someone on the left, James, I think you're on the left, although, you know, you had a very different background for many people on the left. You, I think, of all people, would understand that the working class in this country deserve to be in an economy that works for ordinary working people.
Absolutely. Of course, of course. And that is why I'm opposed to the anti-migrant politics, for that very reason, because I think that yourself and Nigel Farage and Tommy Robinson and so on...
What's Tommy Robinson got to do with this debate? You see what's happening here.
The way in which you focus the attention as if it is the source of all of our country's ills on migration distracts from the main things which are driving stagnant wages, crumbling public services, crap in our water, multinationals not paying taxes, and all the other things which are really the fundamental cause of the fact that, yeah, we don't live in an economy that works for most ordinary people. And I'm afraid that the types of policies that the people on your side of the debate support on all of the economic and social issues drive that inequality and drive that insecurity.
You do understand big business is using cheap migrant labour to undermine the working class in Western economies. You do understand that?
So let's have a conversation about that in a serious way.
Well, hang on then, let's have that serious
Yes, no, I'd love to. I'd love to.
We're going to after the break, everyone. Let me just tell you before I go to the break, if you're not familiar with the request that Reform have put in, just to tell you some of the things that they're asking, they want transparency on the following types of data. So it'll be stuff like the amount of income tax, national insurance, tax credits and child benefit by nationality and immigration status. They want data on arrest rates, prisoner status by nationality and immigration, welfare claims, and data on spending programmes such as the refugee integration loan scheme and so on and so forth. They want full breakdowns of cost per night of hotel accommodation. So you can ponder that over the break and tell me whether or not you think that should be made available to us. If so, do you think anything else should be added or not? We'll continue this conversation in 2. But look, we've just been discussing data and how much transparency there should be when it comes to the impacts of immigration on the UK. I've got a divided panel here to some extent. I've got a lot of support coming from the email from you guys at home saying that you want and you welcome this transparency. Let's just continue this conversation then if we can. James is suggesting that your data set should be expanded to include potential positive impacts as well.
I completely agree. Let's just get everything on the table. Now, the reason...
But then why didn't you add it to your request then?
Well, a lot of that data could show that there's a positive effect of immigration. If you collect tax data, if you collect welfare data, maybe it will show that immigrants are less dependent on the welfare state than, you know, Brits, or maybe it will show that they're not taking a big amount of money out of the economy relative to their contribution. These are things that are missing. The reason we're asking for those things, Michelle, remember, is if you look at the Netherlands, where Dr. Jan van der Beek has done the most comprehensive study of the economic effects of immigration until now, what he finds, and this is where I start to worry about Britain, he finds that by relying on low-skilled, low-wage migration from outside of Europe, which is basically what we've pivoted to ever since the Brexit referendum. Remember, the Conservatives have flooded our economy with low-wage, low-skill migrants who are often earning less than the average wage in this country. What that does is it takes more out of the economy than it puts in, which is why our GDP per capita, our productivity, if you like, is the worst since it's been since the 1970s. And Jan van der Beek estimates it's cost the Dutch about £80 billion. Now, he's a mainstream researcher. I am worried, Michelle, that the moment we start looking at this data, we're going to find that actually the British people have been paying billions of pounds for a extreme policy, and mass immigration is an extreme policy with no democratic consent that is costing them rather than contributing to their national community.
I mean, you say it's not got any democratic consent. I would argue it's the complete opposite. It's got a democratic mandate to have the complete opposite attached. That's what people vote for and absolutely don't get. Anyway, James, your thought?
Well, I think there's very little democratic mandate for most of the macro policies, the major policies that Britain has been living under for about 40 years. There's no democratic support for deindustrialisation. There's no democratic support for giving the bankers everything that they want. There's not democratic support for our role in illegal wars. And I think that part of what Matthew is getting at is downstream of a bigger problem, is an epiphenomenon of a bigger problem. We have huge problems of abuse in the labour market, of people being paid under the minimum wage, of people not being able to bargain up, people being fired and rehired. And the issue there isn't because that there has been low-skill migration. The issue is that trade unions have been under assault for 40 years and people aren't able to organise. There are huge problems in the housing sector, huge problems of poor quality housing, overcrowding, like disgusting slum landlordism, etc. And of course, this concentrates at the most vulnerable ends of society, which is often migrants. But that doesn't mean that they were causing it.
I don't think anybody is saying they're causing it, James. I think a lot of people in this country...
My point is it's downstream of where the fundamental problems are. So if we're talking about issues in the labour market, we should be looking at how the labour market has been deregulated to increase exploitation, and then how that is used by employers, including through hyper-exploitation of workers from elsewhere. We should look at housing, where we have a really terrible housing stock. We have an incredibly expensive private rented sector. We have the breaking up of flats into tiny rooms. And yes, a lot of that is rented at extremely exploitative rates.
James, do you understand why the housing market is in crisis? It's not just in crisis because of supply-side problems. It is in crisis because we have excessive demand. We built 180,000 homes last year in England and Wales to keep up with current levels of immigration. Do you know how many houses we need to build every year?
We haven't been building houses.
Do you know how many houses we need to build?
Please tell me we haven't been...
550,000 homes a year to keep up with migration. What you're presenting to people is it's either or. Either we have an economy with strong trade unions and regulations, right? Or you can listen to Matt and all of these concerns. What you could do is we could have a strong economy where workers have rights. But it could also be an economy where we have moderate, slow, lower levels of immigration, where our national culture and country is preserved and passed on to the next generation. What we've got instead is an extreme policy of mass immigration, which is undercutting the working class and serving big business.
Why do you and your allies then never argue for trade unions and against the bankers, for example? Why are you never saying, here are these fundamental problems, we wish to go for them?
I've said openly, I think the bankers who oversaw the financial crisis should have gone to jail. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with improving workers' rights. But I have a problem with people on the left justifying mass immigration just because it is immigration, without any rational argument.
Well, there'll be no bankers going to jail anytime soon because they're getting filled up with people that have tweeted things that other people don't like.